interesting. We have a great session for you. So before we start, I'll introduce myself. But for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Sonia Gruel. I am one of the Vice Presidents of the PPMA, and I'm also Director of Customer, People and Organisational Resilience at Swindon Borough Council. I am today delighted to introduce Fiyin to this PPMA and Penna session around the curiosity of the interim space. Fiyin heads up the interim HR practice at Penna and is going to take us through the rest of the session. So Fiyin, over to you.
Thanks so much, Sonia. Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. And thank you, as Sonia mentioned, for giving up your time this afternoon to be here. I've split the session into 3 parts just to talk about, as Sonia says, the curiosity about interim. So for the first part, I'll be going through what to consider when making the transition from permanent employment to interim work. I'll then focus on how to successfully market yourself to secure interim work on a regular basis. And then finally, we'll go through what a typical interim recruitment process looks like and how to end an assignment so that matters are left in good shape. And as mentioned, feel free to submit any questions you may have to the chat and we can cover these at the end of the session, or you can reach out to me directly. I think so. The first question would be, when I was thinking about interim? Why interim? Why would I want to work in this way? And I think to answer that, perhaps you have to look at your motivation for doing this and consider some of the benefits of being an interim. Having spoken to my clients and candidates extensively, because our candidates do become our clients and vice versa, I would say one of the best things about being an interim is having flexibility and control. You can choose which organizations you'd like to work for. You won't be limiting yourself by staying in one organization in one role for a long period of time. Many of our interims also talk about the potential work that spirals out from an initial role, because once you've made a name for yourself, you've worked within that council or that authority, then there'll be other projects that likely will fit your skill set and that people would want to use you on. You also have the flexibility to work either part-time, full-time on project-based roles. So you can either choose to work on a very short-term basis or for longer. I would say the average assignment that we look at is usually between 6 to 9 months, but some are 3 months or some are discrete pieces of work, especially in the HR space where it may be such as an investigation. So it's a limited piece of work. And actually from that perspective, you can build up what you're doing and actually see how that would work for you. There is the chance to consider the type of roles that you put yourself forward for, and that gives you more variety. You can make your working life more interesting. And then what our interims find that after a number of assignments, you can effectively carve out a niche for yourself in the marketplace and develop your own specialism. You become known as the go-to person in that space. People want to work with you, they will ask for you. And also to remember, when you're working the interim space, is all about the networking piece that you put together. And I will come on to that in a bit later on. One of the key benefits or key positive elements about being an interim is that you can make an impact in a very short period of time. Our interims often talk about how they've improved systems and processes, and they bring a different viewpoint to an organization so they can enhance the way that things are done and add value to an organization from day one. I guess the question is, why are interims hired? So interims are often hired when there's a problem. So it's the thought of going into an organization, meeting new people, quickly learning about that organization and fixing problems appeal to you, then you're likely to enjoy interim work. The work that you do as an interim will likely be very focused and objectives will be set at the beginning. So a short period of time, you'll be able to, so in that short period of time, you'll be expected to deliver against these objectives. But what it is that there's more of a clarity. You will work closely with the hiring manager. You'll know exactly what you're looking at and you have almost your KPIs put in place so you can say, well, look, these are my key deliverables across this piece of work that I'm doing. So I guess for people who think about an interim, when you look at your permanent career, you often think about, well, I'm trying to progress. It's all about career development, what comes next. And in a way, you could term an interim move as perhaps somewhat sidewards, but that's actually not uncommon. And in our experience, it is clear that you'll have experienced HR professionals that are parachuted into a role where they're supporting the existing function, or as the case may be recently, they may come in to look at how a function can be improved and where they can add those additional bits of knowledge bases and plug any gaps or identify where there's room for improvement. So, you know, maybe a deep dive, look underneath the bonnet, and people use the phrase all the time about holding the mirror up. And actually across all of the functions that we work here at Penna, we have seen so much more review of what the existing condition is and actually what that needs to look like next. In terms of other considerations to make when deciding to move around is the lifestyle and personal circumstances. Being an interim is allowing you to take a lot more control about your life, what you're doing, and how you fit those timings in. So a number of our interims will work, will take the summer off, will take holidays off because they have children or, you know, at school, etc. They want to work flexibly. So where you do have more control as an interim is that around your personal circumstances and making the assignments that you work for you, that you take, sorry, work for you. As an interim, it's important to note that you would not normally get paid. You don't get paid holiday pay, sick pay, local government pension, and there may be times when you're in between roles. So you want to ensure that you're fully prepared for those gaps. What I would say is that that is normally offset by the day rate that you work on. So as you'll know, being an interim, the rates are usually somewhat higher than it would be in a permanent role. But then you have to be flexible around the fact that you may not be working the whole time and you need to essentially start that momentum. But what it is clear is that usually we'll talk to our interims and we'll say, well, the market's quite quiet. Then it ends up being a bit like London buses and lots of opportunities come to you all in one go. So just keep your ear to the ground and work well with the recruiters that you choose to work with, build those relationships so they can keep you informed as to what's happening across the market. Also, it's important that you work on building your own network, and that will be another source of where you can find roles from. So that nicely leads me into some useful tips on how to get interim work on a more regular basis. So let's call it getting your first interim assignment. One of the things to look at is around your CV. Make sure that the style you are formatting is correct. You want to make sure that when it's an interim CV, that it's more tailored towards achievements and outcomes. So that would mean that your interim CV, and I say to all our candidates, have a living document, essentially. Your CV is a living document. Put your brain dump in, but when you're talked to about a role, tweak that CV, make sure that you're highlighting some of the key synopses or key ideas that are focused in the role that you're considering, because interim CVs are shorter. You want to make sure that these are clear and they can say straight away what you've achieved. So you want to highlight all of your experience in the shortest possible way. So I talked about this slightly earlier, but it's really important. Registering with recruitment agencies. So if you're going to be a career interim or make that transition across, then you want to make sure that you have strong relationships in place. And they take time and it works both ways, but you'll be able to work out which kind of recruiters you're happy to work with and do their styles match yours. We would always say work with between 2 to 3 and no more than that, because what you'll start to see is that some of the roles will go out wider, but actually sometimes you will then want to be able to be aware of where the relationship lies, because interim is so fast paced that you want to have that kind of closeness. And I would mean that sometimes we don't even have time to necessarily tell our interims by phone. We'll email you or we will text you straight away to say there's this opportunity, and then we'll come back and follow up with a longer call about what the role will look like, because it may be competitive. So in that space, try and work out some of the agencies that are best for you. They're best in the sectors that you work in, for instance, local government, as we're talking about here. They're market leaders, they have positive reviews from other people, and you will hear from other interims when you speak to them about how they work with agencies and what's best. So try and find an experienced interim already who that you can talk to. They can debrief you and tell you exactly what they find across assignments. The other really important part is around branding stroke marketing, right? So everyone talks about their own personal brand, but actually when you are an interim, your personal brand becomes really important, because that is it. You know, we talk about being as good as your last assignment. So you want to make sure that assignment is adding something to your CV. There's positivity in there. You've got the chance to say, I've changed or inputted and impacted a new function in this way. So really think about what the role is offering you as well, and where that can build on your skills. Specifically to your branding, think about LinkedIn. You want to make sure that you're expanding your own network. So we run a number of new to interim breakfasts. So connect with your recruiters on LinkedIn, talk to other people. And what is important around LinkedIn is also that you update your status. So make it active. You be part of being in control of how you are. So you can say on there that you're looking for new opportunities so that people can contact you. But you can also make sure that the synopsis part about yourself is up to date. It's really quite snappy in terms of the work that you've recently looked at and what you want to do next. So I would say that LinkedIn is one of the key ways in which we communicate and find out our new interims and start those initial relationships. And it will work because for instance, in terms of how I work, we will often put on that we are looking for new candidates in certain spaces. So it might be around ER, or it might be around pay and reward, or HR generalists generally. So pay attention to what LinkedIn is saying and connect with people if you feel that these are the kind of roles that you may be interested in. Also consider attending events. I mentioned the new to interim breakfast, but we will usually, and different agencies do this, but there'll be different events they put on. So keep an ear to the ground, speak to other people as to what's happening in your space and make those connections and build on them from there. In terms of the process itself, well, interviews are much quicker in the interim space. So you have to be aware that you need to focus on making sure you can explain your CV, your experiences, and any synergies between the role that you have undertaken previously and the current opportunity. I would say, to manage everyone's expectations, that interim interviews are a lot quicker. You're probably looking between, some of them can be as short as 30 minutes to just shy of an hour. And if you've been in a permanent process, we'll all recognize that these are much longer. You'll have multiple sets of interviews. On an interim basis, you may well have 2 max, or you'll just have 1 because they've got everyone together. And that will mean that depending on what kind of role it is, you may be being interviewed by the HRD, it may be the chief exec if you've come in to improve a function. So bear in mind that you want to be able to highlight your key skills and experience as soon as possible so that everyone knows exactly what you can bring to the table and what you can bring to the role. And interim interviews are slightly different. So they will always be an interview, but a lot of them, they're perhaps a bit more conversational. So make sure that although you're talking and getting the conversation part across, you are using that to say, I did X in my last role. I think that this would be useful. I can see that you've got this, having read, about your authority. I can see that your concerns are perhaps that you're becoming a unitary, or as everyone knows, it's around funding, the effect of coming back to work after the pandemic, hybrid working. So just have those kind of original buzz points already highlighted so that you know that you're able to focus on those once you're having your discussion. And then the bit that everyone always wants to know about being an interim is the day rate. So you need to think about your worth and discuss with the recruiter to find out the market value. And I think it's always worth bearing in mind, if you've not done an interim assignment before, price yourself competitively, but be reasonable, because you want to shine in that opportunity without anyone thinking we're paying this person X. So have a conversation that's very frank and honest with the recruiter to tell you, they'll tell you what the expectations will be from the client. They'll also explain to you how it all works and in terms of timesheets and everything else around that. But don't be shy to think about what you're worth, but also balance it out with, where are you in your career? What will be the value of the role? i.e., if it's going to be doing something that you feel is going to really push you forward and allow you to build on that, think about it, because it's only that one assignment. But then the next assignment, we could talk about increasing the rate and seeing where that would work for you. So flexibility is key. I appreciate that everyone has to live, and we're all aware of the cost of living at the moment, but it is about that balancing act. And actually, you will find yourself in a market where you'll be called more frequently and consistently about roles if you have that flexibility. The final point would be around compliance. So we would have to collect, and we like to do this before we start any processes really, proof of passport. We like to get references. So these are on file and we'll have them as for all of the assignments that you do. I appreciate if you're in a permanent role, you won't necessarily want to give those out, but we can collect them as we go along. But it's important that, that you work together and provide us with all the compliance points as soon as possible. And if you have any questions around that, around umbrellas, etc., we can find out and discuss that later on. And then I think just the final part I said, and I'm conscious of time and questions, is the interim recruitment process. So the interim recruitment process differs significantly to how permanent recruitment works. As I've said, during a recruitment process that's permanent, there's normally an application process where you submit your CV along with supporting documents. You'll have a first stage, maybe a second stage, an assessment day, and a panel interview before a finally hearing on outcome. This process can take, say, a month or two, and then there's a notice period you need to give. With interim recruitment, it turns it all on its head. That's inverted completely, and you fast forward a lot. Normally, so this is understanding how your recruiter works. Your CV is submitted along with a shortlist, typically around 4 or 5. We won't send multiple CVs because you want to ensure that your clients feel that they're getting the best CVs as well. So we'll have this conversation and we'll shortlist. So the hiring manager will take a look through and will normally ask to interview, say, 3 or 4 of those candidates. And then they'll make a decision on who they'd like to appoint. And that's usually made quite quickly. An entire cycle can be done typically within a week or 2, or in fact, even quicker within 48 hours. So availability is crucial. We always like to think, ideally, availability is within a month. Having said that, though, processes can fluctuate because it depends on what's happening across the organization and whose diaries you need to be looked at. So realistically, anything between 2 months and a month is the best amount of time for availability. So you would like to be able to start your role within a month. So if you're in that thought process as to, do I want to leave my permanent job, etc., feel free to reach out. We can have a discussion in a bit more detail, and I can tell you about the kind of roles that we're working on. So in terms of the return to work, the majority of roles we're working on at the moment are hybrid. However, there are exceptions, especially at the more senior level where visibility is important. So it's likely, and this is what people have come to and across the conversation, is perhaps 2 days a week in the office, but 2 to 3 is where people have actually settled on. Some roles are completely remote, but I do think there has to be that flexibility. But we will try and find out these finer points for you when we take the brief. So therefore, it avoids any unexpected surprises at the end of any process. Regarding the practicalities of once you've accepted, in terms of onboarding, with most roles, IT equipment is shipped out, or you'll pick that up. You'll also have inductions and introductions done via Teams or Zoom, or perhaps they'll ask you to come into the office for that day and you can meet as many of the team as possible. So we would say that I've talked about a lot of the positives, and then just in terms of the flip side, the negative of working in interim roles, I would say be very careful because your reputation is really important. One of the biggest no-nos of interim work is leaving an assignment early. Of course, we appreciate that things can be beyond your control, or something may have gone wrong on a scale that isn't able to be dealt with. But we would always suggest that you see out a contract, and we would never, as we work closely with our clients as well as our candidates, we want to make sure that you're happy. So we try and keep that line of dialogue open each way. But finish your assignment on time, complete the objectives, make a good impression with colleagues and your line manager, and leave the organization knowing that you fulfilled your obligations. By ending assignments on good terms, you'll potentially leave the door open for you to return in the future. And you'll also enhance your reputation in the interim market. And reputation and credibility counts for a lot. I've talked about this before, but feel free. I've obviously focused on HR, but I have clients and candidates, colleagues across the space that work across a wider remit of roles. So if you do know someone that's looking, please feel free to reach out to us at Penna, and we're always open. We can have an impartial conversation and advise you around, the market, what you're looking at. And so I think I truly enjoy my job because it allows me the chance to have this autonomy and freely to speak to our candidates around their careers and what works for you in that situation. So please just keep engaging with us, and it is all about building long-lasting relationships. So that's the end of where I'm up to, but I'll just see if there's any questions in the chat.
There are, Fiyin. We've got a few good questions, and thank you. That was so informative. Lots of really, really helpful insight, information, positive tips, and a bit of reality check. So I found that really, really amazing. I've got pages of notes, so thank you. There were a couple of questions. Would you like me to read them through, or are you happy to take them?
Yeah, I don't mind. Do you want to? Yeah. I can.
I'll grab the first one. So Clive, hi Clive. Clive is asking, Clive, would you like to come in and ask your question? Actually, that might be quite nice. Would you like to do that? Are you happy to?
More than happy to. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you for that. My camera's playing up, unfortunately, so I can come off of mute, but not on camera too much. So apologies for that. Thanks for all the information. Echo Sonia's thoughts. That was yeah, really useful. Quick question, really is your view or experience and the emergence, and it's only kind of slightly anecdotal stuff, I guess, but the emergence of partial interiming, if that's such a phrase, almost people working part-time in a permanent role and then picking up into work for the other part of the working week, if that makes sense. So I've just started to see that a little bit more coming through on LinkedIn, etc. So almost looking for yeah, part-time interiming. And I suppose the question actually is that a thing? Are you seeing that? Am I just getting the wrong end of the stick? And potentially is that slightly more appealing for those people that are kind of potentially stepping into that interim space actually, so as a first step before diving in at the deep end, so to speak?
Thanks, Clive. I would say yes, we are seeing more part-time interim opportunities coming to the market. And I would say, to answer your point, yeah, it would definitely be a potentially safer option in terms of how you hit the interim world working. I would always say, though, that interim assignments on the whole, you pick and choose, but the majority of candidates do like to work, say, either a 4-day week or a 5-day week, especially to start with, because you're able to throw yourself more into the organization that you're working with and the role itself. Having said that, there are a few roles that are a bit more flexible, and they were looking at something on a part-time basis. But the majority of roles in which we work on, we would say that people would be doing 4 to 5 days, and they're comfortable with that. And the client is also comfortable with a 4-day week. I think the flexible part-time work really comes down to budgets and the level of experience of the candidate. So it may be that this is a more senior candidate, they're very experienced, and for the client as well, it works if they do, say, 2 to 3 days. But then it's putting a lot of pressure on yourself. So I always think maybe when you're first trying it out, if that works with your current organization, then sure, do something that's a bit consultative, do a couple of days and see. But I think our interims have never come back and said we've regretted going into the interim space. They've loved it. They've thrown themselves into it. And what I hadn't mentioned is that you see a number of interims that will do interim assignments for a while and will still be able to go back into permanent opportunities. So for a lot of people, it's just that broadening out of your career. You can do more, you can be involved without, say, the politics of an organization. And then they can come back to a permanent role if that's what takes their fancy. So I don't think, in the same way that it was a couple of years ago, you're not shutting the door in any way or form by going to do an interim assignment. People like it for a break, and then they can come back and do other things.
Thanks, Fiyin. Really useful.
Thank you both. Next question we have, Fiyin, is from Mark. Mark, are you happy to jump in and ask your questions? There's a couple of questions there actually from yourself, isn't there?
There is. Sorry, I took the opportunity. I hope you don't mind. I think you've actually answered the first question as part of your presentation, Fiyin, which I think is absolutely great. So, in terms of whether LinkedIn's a good way to pick up interim work, I know you were talking there about CV development and making sure that it was a live document and making sure that it was more about objectives and outcomes, which of course LinkedIn kind of lends itself to. So I suppose part of it was how broad an awareness is there in terms of availability and sort of that engagement through LinkedIn, or whether it was preferable to sign up with or to engage with an actual recruiter like Penna. I can actually see from what you said there are clear benefits in terms of signing up with an organisation like Penna, not just in terms of the support and the guidance that you've detailed there, but also people are far more likely, I would imagine, I'm answering my own question here, right? People are far more likely to approach Penna to see what pool of availability you've got and what pool of interim workers you've got that might be able to then meet that. You did answer it as part of it, but I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add. The other question that I've asked is really boring, and it is, isn't it, tax and IR35? But it was just if there was a good source of information in terms of kind of unpicking all of that, because that's all a bit of a mystery to me as well.
Great. Well, to answer your first question, absolutely. I would say speak to the agencies, you'll get a feel for the agency that you like anyway. So there's always reviews from the IIM as well, which tell you kind of where agencies rank across the board. But I think it's about building that relationship, because you'll work with one recruiter specifically, unless they're on annual leave or something, but you get that feel for people. So you have those conversations and see. I'm not going to go into too much detail around IR35. It does play a big part, of course. We will speak to our clients to ensure whether roles are sitting inside or outside of IR35. The majority of roles, usually because they fall within structure, will be inside of IR35 anyway. What I do think is quite useful for you, and if you want to pick up with me after, is we do have a list of kind of umbrella companies, etc., that you can work through as well to ensure that piece, because that's the other bit when you first start in interim roles is, well, hold on a second, how do I do all the finance side of everything if I haven't set up a limited company? And, you know, we would never advise one way or the other, but I do think that when you're starting out, sometimes the umbrellas are the best route to go through and see where you go from there. So we have a list of approved ones that I can send across, and you can have more conversations around that if you want to email me directly.
Ian, thank you. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Fiyin. Does anybody have any other questions this afternoon? No. Fiyin, would you be happy for people to approach you directly should they have questions that come to mind afterwards, or that may not be relevant for the forum here? Is that okay?
Sure, reach out. I would say connect via LinkedIn, or you can find my email. I think my email should be somewhere. So it's just fiyin.fayeye@penna.com. So feel free to reach out and we can arrange a conversation in a bit more detail.
Amazing, thank you. Fiyin, listen, thank you very much for another amazing, massively informative Penna-led session. It's been really, really, I think, really, really insightful for everybody on the call, I'm sure. I've certainly taken away loads. So thank you very much for that. Thank you to everybody for joining this afternoon as well. Before you go, I would like to just do a very quick plug for a couple of things coming up next week. First is a session that's being held via Oracle, which is around the influence of the impact of the pandemic influencing the way in which we work. So if anybody's interested, that's taking place next Thursday, and that's being led by Lethan Green, who I'm sure many of you will know. And the second, if anybody is interested, is the PPMA AGM, also on Thursday afternoon. So all the information should be in your emails or will be sent via Grace. So if anybody's interested, please do join. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.